The day the sky cracked open. The ship did not arrive on a dramatic stormy night with lightning splitting the heavens and thunder rolling across mountains. It arrived on a Wednesday afternoon at 2:17 p.m., right in the middle of Melbourne's lunch rush, when the streets of the CBD were packed with office workers carrying coffee cups and arguing about where to eat. The sky above Flagstaff Gardens simply split open, not with fire, not with explosion, but with a low, grinding hum that pressed against every chest like an invisible hand. Then the ship came through. It was enormous. Not enormous in the way that tall buildings are enormous, where you can still walk around them and feel like the world makes sense. This was enormous in the way that rewrites your understanding of what a thing can be. It was at least 400 meters from end to end, black as burned coal, shaped like something between a blade and a fist, and it descended with the kind of slow, deliberate patience that said it had done this before and found it quite easy. It settled in Flagstaff Gardens with a sound like the earth exhaling. The grass beneath it simply ceased to exist. 3 elm trees that had stood since 1933 were gone without ceremony. A food truck selling Vietnamese banh mi rolls was caught at the edge of the landing zone. The truck survived. The awning did not. The owner of that truck, a woman named Maggie Tran, 51 years old, third-generation Australian, stood with her hands on her hips and looked at her ruined awning. Then she looked at the ship. Then she looked at her awning again. "Right," Maggie said. Then she went back to making banh mi because the lunch rush doesn't stop for anyone. Within 4 minutes, people were filming. Within 6, the footage was online. Within 9, there were already 3 different edits of the landing set to different music circulating across social platforms. One used an orchestral dramatic score and framed it like a disaster movie. One used a cheerful pop song and made the whole thing look like a theme park opening. The third, and most popular, used absolutely no music at all and just let the absurdity speak for itself. That one hit 2 million views before the ship even finished settling. The crowd gathered the way Melbourne crowds always gather, with curiosity, noise, and a complete refusal to be told what to do. Police set a perimeter. People stood at the perimeter. Some leaned over it. A teenager with a selfie stick extended it past the tape, got a clear shot of the ship's hull, and posted it with the caption, "New neighbors just moved and didn't even say hi." It got 50,000 likes in 11 minutes. Nobody ran. This was the first thing that confused the crew of the Sovereign Wrath. That was the ship's name, rendered in the angular script of the Viethian Dominion, an empire that had existed for 600 years and had successfully absorbed 31 civilizations into its structure, usually in under 2 weeks. The Sovereign Wrath had led 19 of those campaigns. Her commander, Zarvek of the High Conquest Division, had personally overseen the submission of 11 worlds. He knew exactly what should happen when his ship landed. There should be panic. Immediate, system-wide panic. Zarvek stood on the bridge looking at the sensor readings and could not find the panic. "Give me the biometric sweep again," he said. His second, a sharp-featured officer named Vel, read from the display. Elevated heart rates consistent with excitement or physical exertion. Elevated cortisol, but within recreational parameters. No mass adrenaline response. No evacuation patterns. No aggression clustering. Vel paused. "Commander, the dominant emotional signature from the population density below is consistent with what our xenopsychology library categorizes as amusement." Zarvek looked at the screen for a long time. "They are amused," he said. "The reading suggests so, Commander." "By us." "It appears that way." Zarvek set his jaw, which was a complicated structure on a Viethian face, wide and ridged, with 2 smaller secondary jaw plates that could extend when needed for combat purposes or, as the Viethian biology had evolved them, for cracking the thick-shelled food sources of their home world. He had never thought much about his jaw before. He thought about it now because the sensor array had just processed a statistically significant cluster of humans pointing at it. He straightened his armor. The armor was not merely protective, it was communicative. Black carbon alloy over a frame that made him stand nearly 2 meters 20, inscribed with the names of every world the Dominion had claimed. It was designed to make one statement without any words: we have done this before, we will do it again, and you will not stop us. He had walked down a ramp in this armor 11 times and watched entire civilizations process their own ending in real time. He walked down the ramp now. The crowd noise did not stop. It changed, it got louder. In fact, a rising wave of sound that Zarvek's training told him should be a fear response, but his ears told him was something else entirely. There were hundreds of them now, packed at the police tape, and they were, he searched for the word, delighted. They were looking at him the way that, he would later learn, humans look at something they cannot quite believe is real but very much want to be real. Sheer, unfiltered fascination. Someone shouted, "He's actually real," as though there had been some debate on this point. Someone else immediately responded, "Obviously he's real, Dave." Zarvek stopped at the base of the ramp. He activated his translation matrix, the device on his chest that processed local languages in real time, and let the crowd settle. They did not settle. But there was a directional shift in attention that was close enough. He used the voice. The Vethian command voice, calibrated to resonate at a frequency that activated the threat response centers in the nervous systems of most known biological species. Deep, resonant, carrying the weight of 600 years of empire behind every syllable. "People of this world," he said. "The Vethian Dominion has extended its sovereignty to your star system. This is not a negotiation. This is not an invitation. You will lay down whatever military capacity you believe yourselves to have. You will present your governing bodies for processing. And you will." "What's the Vethian Dominion?" someone near the front called out. Genuinely curious. No fear in the voice whatsoever. Just a person who wanted to know. "It's the Empire," someone next to them said helpfully. "They're an empire. He's the commander." "Oh, like, how big an empire?" 31 planets apparently. "I just looked it up." 31? That's it? This was said without any particular malice. Just the honest response of a species that had recently discovered the universe contained hundreds of billions of galaxies and found 31 planets to be, in context, a fairly modest operation. Zarvek processed this. He had given this speech, or a version of it, 11 times. No species had ever responded by immediately looking up his empire and commenting on its relative size. He tried to continue. "The consequences of resistance are..." "Is that a food truck?" said a man in a business shirt, shielding his eyes and looking past Zarvek at where the sovereign wrath had settled. "Did you land on a food truck?" The awning, Maggie Tran's voice came clearly from somewhere to the left. "Not the truck. Awning's gone, truck's fine. Bon me still $4.50, cash or card." There was an immediate redistribution of crowd attention. A meaningful percentage of the assembled humans turned toward the offer of food. Someone bought a banh mi. Then several people did. Zarvek stood at the base of his conquest ramp while a queue formed at a street food stall 15 meters to his left and watched his moment dissolve into the Melbourne lunch hour. A small boy, perhaps 7 years old, pushed to the front of the crowd near the police tape and stared at Zarvek with enormous brown eyes. Zarvek met his gaze. Children of most species showed the most acute fear responses. Children understood danger instinctively in ways adults had learned to suppress. The boy pointed at him and said, "Are you the bad guy?" Zarvek drew himself up to his full height. "I am Commander Zarvek of the..." "So yes," the boy said. "In your framework," Zarvek said carefully, "I am the one who has come to..." "Mum," the boy said, turning to the woman next to him, "he won't say if he's the bad guy." "Just ask him directly," the mother said, not looking up from her phone where she was filming. The boy looked back at Zarvek with the pure unfiltered directness that only children and diplomats can achieve. "Are you here to hurt people?" Zarvek opened his mouth. He closed it again. In 11 campaigns, in 11 submission speeches, no one had ever asked him that specific question that directly. The conquest doctrine had language for resistance and for acceptance and for everything in between. It did not have language for a 7-year-old asking if you're going to hurt people while his mother films it for social media. Our mission, Zarvek said finally, is to bring order. That's not a no, the boy said. The crowd heard this. Several people repeated it. Someone nearby said that was a very good point. Zarvek stood perfectly still while the observation rippled outward through the assembled Australians, who collectively decided they agreed with the 7-year-old. Back on the bridge, Vel was very quiet for several seconds. Then he said, "Commander, the video of the child is already on 6 different platforms." Zarvek turned and walked back up the ramp. He did not run. He was a professional. But he walked with the energy of a man who needs to sit down in a quiet room and reconsider several things. Behind him, the crowd applauded. Not in mockery, or not entirely. There was something genuine in it. Humans, Zarvek would come to understand much later, applaud things they find entertaining. He had, without intending to, put on a show. He entered the war room. He sat at the head of the long table. His 11 senior officers looked at him. They laughed, he said. No one said anything. They bought food, he said. During the submission address, a child questioned my intentions and the crowd agreed with the child. He looked at the table surface for a moment. And someone is selling charcoal sketches of my ship. He had seen this through the viewport on the way back up. A young woman had set up a small folding table near the perimeter and was producing quick charcoal drawings of the Sovereign Wrath and selling them to the people in the queue for Maggie's banh mi. She was doing brisk business. She's actually quite good, said Junior Officer Pren, who immediately understood from the silence that this was not a helpful contribution. Zarvek looked at his officers. What do we know about these people? Vel pulled up the file. Category 4 Civilization, he read. Limited spaceflight capacity. Politically fractured. No unified military command. Significant internal conflicts. Not considered a threat. He paused. The threat assessment has not been updated. Updated, Zarvek said. To what level? Zarvek thought about the boy who asked if he was the bad guy. About Maggie Tran, who had lost her awning to an interstellar conquest vessel and responded by keeping the lunch service running. About the charcoal artist charging $8 per sketch of the most powerful warship in this sector of the galaxy. I don't know yet, he said honestly. But update it to something. These people are not what the file says they are. Outside, in Flagstaff Gardens, the queue for banh mi was now 40 people long. Someone had started a petition about the awning. And the video of the 7-year-old asking Zarvek if he was the bad guy had, in the time it took to walk back up a ramp and sit down at a table, crossed 8 million views and was still climbing. Lunch with the enemy. The United Nations did not send a general. They did not send a weapons expert, a threat assessment team, or a committee of defense ministers with briefcases full of contingency plans. After 6 hours of emergency deliberation in Geneva, during which approximately 40% of the session was spent watching the video of the 7-year-old boy, the UN Security Council voted unanimously to send Raymond Okafor. Ray was 63 years old. He had spent 31 years teaching high school geography in Lagos, Nigeria, followed by 12 years working as a community liaison officer for the UN refugee program in 4 different countries. He had negotiated access agreements with warlords, convinced 3 different armed factions to share a water supply, and once talked a man off a roof in Nairobi using nothing but a thermos of tea and genuine human interest in the man's problems. He had been pulled into UN diplomatic work almost by accident, the way genuinely useful people often are, and he had risen steadily because he possessed something that could not be taught in any diplomatic academy on Earth. He was completely, structurally, almost supernaturally impossible to intimidate. Not because he was brave in the dramatic sense. Not because he had no fear. But because Ray Okafor had spent decades sitting across from people who wanted him to be afraid, and he had long ago decided that being afraid was simply not the most productive use of the available time. There were always more interesting things to focus on. He arrived at the Melbourne perimeter in a grey sedan with UN plates, carrying a canvas bag from which the top of a thermos was visible and what appeared to be a stack of wrapped sandwiches. His security detail consisted of 2 people, which was the minimum the protocol office would allow, and he had already told both of them they could wait by the car. The perimeter officer looked at him. "Sir, the alien vessel is..." "Yes, I can see it," Ray said pleasantly. "It's very large. Has anyone told them we're coming? We transmitted the meeting request this morning." "And?" "They acknowledged it, sir. They said," the officer checked his notes, "they said they would consider attending." "Well," Ray said, "let's go see if they considered it." He walked toward the ship. On the bridge of the Sovereign Wrath, Vel had been monitoring the approach of the UN delegation for the past 20 minutes. He reported to Zarvek with the careful neutrality of someone delivering information they personally found bewildering. "The human envoy is approaching on foot, Commander. He appears to be alone. He is carrying food." A pause. "He is looking at the ship with what our biometric array categorizes as genuine interest." "Not fear," Zarvek said. "Not even adjacent to fear, Commander." Zarvek had spent the morning reading everything the Sovereign Wrath's intelligence systems had managed to compile on humans in the past 18 hours. It was substantially more than they had gathered in the 3 weeks of passive observation before landing, because it turned out that humans had voluntarily placed an extraordinary amount of information about themselves on globally accessible networks. You did not need to spy on humans. You simply needed to look at what they had already made public, which was, as far as Zarvek could tell, almost everything. He had read about human history. All of it that he could get through in 6 hours, which was not all of it, because human history was extraordinarily long and extraordinarily violent and also somehow full of art, which was a combination he had not previously encountered in any species. Most species were either warlike or creative. The warlike ones made weapons. The creative ones made culture. Humans appeared to have decided to do both simultaneously throughout their entire existence and somehow end up at a place where a woman sold charcoal drawings of a warship to people eating sandwiches. He had also watched, because Vel had compiled them and he felt he should understand the enemy, approximately 47 videos of humans doing things that had no obvious survival or military value. Humans jumping off cliffs attached to elastic cords. Humans voluntarily entering enclosures with large predators. Humans eating food that was, by any biological measure, far beyond the safe threshold of chemical intensity, and then filming their own pain responses and sharing them with other humans who watched and laughed. He did not understand these people. But he was beginning to feel, in the particular way that 11 campaigns of experience created, that they were going to be a problem unlike anything the Dominion had processed before. "Send them in," he said. He paused. "The envoy. Just the envoy. He appears to be alone already, Commander." "Good." They met in the ship's formal reception chamber, which the Sovereign Wrath maintained for the processing of surrendering planetary representatives. It was designed to communicate power. The ceilings were 6 meters high. The walls displayed the conquest record of the Vethian Dominion, 31 worlds, rendered in glowing script. The table was long, dark, and deliberately uncomfortable for non-Vethian physiologies. The lighting was calibrated to be slightly too dim for most species' visual comfort while remaining perfectly clear for Vethian eyes. Ray Okafor walked in, looked around with the expression of a man who has walked into many rooms and made his assessment of all of them, and said, "Nice place. Very dramatic. Do you mind if I put these on the table?" He was already putting the sandwiches on the table. Zarvek sat at the head of it in full armor. Vel stood at his right. 2 additional officers flanked the walls. The room had, in 31 campaigns, produced submission agreements, surrender documents, and in 3 cases, the complete psychological dissolution of planetary leadership figures who simply could not bear what the room represented. Ray set out the sandwiches. He unwrapped them with the methodical care of someone who takes food seriously. He placed the thermos beside them. He pulled out 2 cups, looked at Zarvek, looked at Vel, looked at the 2 officers by the wall, and went back into his bag and produced 2 more cups. I wasn't sure about dietary restrictions, Ray said, sitting down, so I got a variety. These are egg and cress. These are chicken. This one's just cheese because in my experience there's always someone who wants just cheese. He looked at Zarvek. I'm Ray. Raymond Okafor. I represent the United Nations, which represents most of the people on this planet, though I'll be honest with you, the political structure is complicated and anyone who tells you otherwise is oversimplifying. Zarvek looked at him for a long moment. You are not afraid, he said. Ray considered this seriously, which Zarvek had not expected. He had expected denial or performance. Instead, Ray looked at the ceiling for a second, the way someone looks when they are actually thinking about a question rather than preparing an answer they already have. I wouldn't say that exactly, Ray said. This is the strangest room I've ever sat in and you are genuinely quite imposing, no offense intended, and there's a ship the size of several football stadiums sitting on a public park in Melbourne. So there's something in here that's paying attention to all of that. He tapped his chest. But I find that when something pays attention to fear, it gets bigger. So I try to give it something else to pay attention to. He poured tea into one of the cups and pushed it across the table. Do you drink anything? There was a silence in the room that Vel would later describe in his mission log as unprecedented in the context of conquest operations. Zarvek said, we consume a liquid compound that. I'll take that as a maybe, Ray said. What should I call you? The file says Supreme Commander Zarvek, but that feels like a lot for a conversation. Commander is sufficient. Commander. Ray nodded, tried the tea, seemed satisfied with it. All right. I'm going to be direct with you because I think you're a direct sort of person and I don't have the patience for the long way around at my age. You came here to conquer us. That's the word you used in the transmission, conquest. And based on what I read last night about your other campaigns, the general expectation is that we panic, you make some demands, we comply, and then we're part of your empire. Is that more or less right? Zarvek said, that is the process, yes. Okay, Ray said. So here's the thing. He picked up a sandwich, appeared to decide to eat it, and took a bite. He chewed. He swallowed. He did this with the complete unhurried ease of a man who was not going to let the gravity of a situation stop him from eating his lunch. That's not going to work here. And I don't mean that as a threat because frankly I don't think we could stop you militarily if you decided to push, at least not quickly. But it's not going to work because of the way we're built. Zarvek leaned forward slightly. This was the first response from any planetary representative that had not been either surrender or defiant posturing. Explain. We don't really do submission, Ray said simply. I don't mean we're all brave. I mean structurally, as a species, we tend to get worse under that kind of pressure rather than better. You can look at our history. Every time someone's tried to dominate us, and plenty have tried, plenty of us have tried to dominate other parts of us, it creates about 300 years of problems that the people who started it never have to deal with personally but everyone else does. He drank his tea. We're better when we're engaged with something. Curious about something. Working on something together. That's when we actually function. Zarvek studied him. Behind him, Vel was making notes with the quiet intensity of someone who has just heard something that changes the shape of a problem. You are suggesting, Zarvek said slowly, that your species is ungovernable. No, Ray said. I'm suggesting we're quite difficult to govern from outside and reasonably good at governing ourselves when we put our minds to it, which admittedly is not always. He pushed the egg and cress sandwich toward Zarvek's side of the table. What I'm actually suggesting is that you might find us more interesting as something other than conquered people. Zarvek looked at the sandwich. He did not touch it. The Dominion has no framework for that. I know, Ray said. I read about the Dominion last night. Your framework is very clean. Very efficient. 31 planets, all organized, all contributing, no mess. He paused. Can I ask you something personal? Zarvek said nothing, which Ray correctly interpreted as permission. Do you actually enjoy it? The conquering? He asked it the way you ask someone if they enjoy their job, not as an accusation, but as genuine curiosity. Because from the outside it looks like something you're very good at and have done a long time, and in my experience those two things don't always mean the same as enjoying something. The room was so quiet that the ventilation system of the Sovereign Wrath was audible. Vel had stopped writing. Both officers by the wall had, almost imperceptibly, leaned forward. Zarvek sat with the question for a long time. In 63 years of life, Ray had learned to sit with silences. He did not fill this one. He drank his tea and let the question exist in the space between them like something that had needed to be in the room for a while. It was purposeful, Zarvek said finally. Not yes. Not no. Purposeful. The Dominion believes that order serves all species better than the chaos of isolation. I believe this. Ray nodded slowly. He noted the past tense. He did not point it out. And now? Zarvek looked at his hands. At the names of 11 worlds inscribed in the armor on his forearms. Now I am sitting in my conquest chamber eating a human sandwich. He had picked it up without noticing. He held it, looked at it, and then with the careful deliberateness of someone making a conscious choice, took a bite. Chewed. His secondary jaw plates moved with it in the way they did when processing unfamiliar textures. Egg and cress, Ray said helpfully. Classic. From somewhere distant in the ship came the sound of Pren telling someone else about the sandwich situation and being told to be quiet. Zarvek set the sandwich down. He looked at Ray Okafor, 63 years old, gray at his temples, completely unafraid, sitting in the most imposing room in the most powerful conquest vessel in this sector of the galaxy as though he had simply dropped in for lunch, because he had. What do you actually want? Zarvek asked. Not the political answer. What do you want from this conversation? Ray smiled. It was a warm smile, the kind built by decades of sitting across from difficult people and finding them interesting anyway. Honestly, he said. I want to know about your home world. I want to know what it looks like and what your people do when they're not conquering planets and whether you have something like music. He refilled his tea. And then I want to figure out, together, what happens next. Because I genuinely don't know, and in my experience, I genuinely don't know is the most interesting place a conversation can start. Zarvek looked at him for a long time. Then he said, our home world has 7 moons. Ray leaned forward, both elbows on the table, with the expression of a man who has just been given exactly what he came for. Tell me about them, he said. And in the formal conquest chamber of the Sovereign Wrath, surrounded by the glowing names of 31 subjugated worlds, the Supreme Commander of the Vethian Dominion's 19th campaign talked about home for the first time in 11 years while a retired geography teacher from Lagos listened like it was the most important thing he had ever heard. Which, as it turned out, it was. Outside, in Flagstaff Gardens, the charcoal artist had sold out completely and was taking custom orders. Maggie Tran had restocked twice. And the video of the 7-year-old asking if Zarvek was the bad guy had crossed 40 million views, with a comments section that was, in the particular chaotic way of human communication, somehow both completely ridiculous and entirely sincere. Humanity had not fought. Had not knelt. Had not run. It had done something the Vethian Dominion had no word for, no framework for, and no defense against whatsoever. It had simply been itself. And that, as Commander Zarvek of the High Conquest Division was beginning to understand for the first time in 63 years of life and 11 planetary campaigns, was going to be more than enough.